Right. The problem I've got with one of my plugs is that the hole in the cylinder head has a thread from about here around to about here. There's a little area here where it seems to be flattened off, and when you screw in this plug, which has a shoulder here which is meant to seal it, you can almost see a little gap just here. So that's not good. Now this isn't actually, this is a modern equivalent NGK plug that's recommended for flatheads. However, if you take an original flathead plug, this is a Champion 7. If you can see, there's a 7 there somewhere. Yeah, you can see it works a different way. It doesn't have a shoulder, it's flat here, and it has a crushable washer. So I am thinking, if I get a plug of this kind of design with the crushable washer, and it seals flat onto the metal round here, so it pushes down onto this metal round here that surrounds the plug flat, I might get away with it. Now there are a couple of designs that are like this that will fit. One is made by Champion, and I can't remember the name of the other one, but I've ordered one of each basically, and we'll see. You see there? We'll see how well they work. I might get away with it. This is just a little experiment. If your threads are a bit loose in your cylinder head, I was just wondering if there's any variation in the thread diameter from one manufacturer to another. So this is the. So I thought I'd just measure them with a pair of calipers. So this is the original Champion 7, and you can see it's 7.78 millimeters. It's got about 5 good turns of thread on it, and it has like a crush washer here, so that's obviously had it. So in terms of replacements, commonly recommended one of the NGKs, Ep.4 6FS. Now they're smaller actually, 17.5 millimeters from there to there. Also these seem to only have about 4 turns of thread. I mean, they've all got about the same distance from the shoulder or washer to the end of the electrode here. What about the Autolite ones? These are recommended as well. They're a little bit bigger, 17.68. They've also got a washer instead of a shoulder, which I want because I think I might have a little tiny bit of leak otherwise. And also they seem to have a good sort of number of turns of thread. And then the Champion replacement, the D16J, again, crush washer, good number of turns of thread, and that's 17.76. So in fact, I know we're talking fractions of a millimeter here, but if you're really stuck and you're right on the edge of the plug not tightening up properly, and you're thinking about helicoiling the head or something, you want the fattest, widest plug. So the widest is actually the Champion of these ones that I measured, replacement plugs. Again, only by like 0.2 of a mil, but it might just make the difference in terms of it seating or not. So I'm going to put this in and see if it stays put. If it doesn't, then I'm going to have to helicoil the head or put a plug insert into the head. Got my engine on my trolley, and the next thing is to work on the rear axle and line it up across here. And then we'll start sort of thinking where the cockpit might go and where the front suspension might go. So I've got my rear axle here. I've taken these side bars off already. And they're down here. One is slightly bent, which will need sorting out. So they are held on by one giant bolt in the centre here. Underneath, this is upside down. See, these two go together, each side there. Then at the rear, got these two plates with 2 holes in each, and they bolt up right up here onto the end plates. This is a 37 axle. I think on earlier axles, the diagonal bars would sort of bolt up here. Problem was then, and if you're in a crash, or you went over a pothole, this section could bend, So presumably to make it stronger, they ran them right out to the end plates here. All these nuts are Castle nuts with a split pin that goes through. Some of the split pins, of course, don't really want to come out. There's a number of YouTube videos people have made on how to get them out, various tricks, but basically you straighten the two ends as much as possible and then try and tap it through. That doesn't normally work. If there's enough of the loop sticking out, you can sometimes get a screwdriver through it and tap it with a hammer, tap the side of the screwdriver to pull it out. Failing everything, you can bend them back and forth and snap them off as flush to the bolt as you can get, and then turn the screw, the nut, and just force it off, because the split pins should be made of a thinner metal, a softer metal than these. The danger is that you damage the threads. I had to do that with one of them, and in fact hadn't damaged the threads, so I was lucky, and then I used a punch to punch the remains of the pin out of the hole. But yeah, that's fun and games. So the next thing, I've got 6 bolts here which I have to undo. This is the torque tube. There's a drive shaft, like a thin prop shaft, runs down the middle with a female splined end here, which should fit over the male splined pinion shaft, I think it's called, which goes into the differential. I've unbolted them. That was fun and games. Managed to get them off. One of them I had to hammer, because I'd rounded the head of the bolt off. I hammered on a 13mm metric socket, hammered it on, and then I was able to get enough bite to undo it. I've obviously damaged that bolt. I'll have to replace that with a new one, but I've got all the bolts out and haven't snapped any off, leaving anything in here, so that's good really. So I was expecting this to just slide off and the splined end of the drive shaft just come off. In fact, it comes off a little bit and then it gets stuck. So I've been consulting my book. There's these short books by a guy called Vern Tardell, and in here, these are mine of useful information. It tells you how to take it off. So the problem is, I think, on the other end, on the engine end of the shaft, there's a speedo drive held on with 2 bolts, and I've got to take that off, and then the torque tube should slide off, leaving the drive shaft down the centre, still connected to the banjo splines. And you'll see there's like a pin that has to be driven out before it comes off. So that's what I'm going to try and do now. So let's see, do I have a speedo drive? Yes I do. Is it held on with 2 bolts? Yes it is. Also apparently the drive ratio at the back here, bearing in mind this is the underside, should be stamped here as 2 numbers. One divided by the other gives you your ratio. Now on mine I can't actually see it, but apparently it's also on here somewhere. So we'll take that off and take a look at it. Well, of course, one's come undone really easily and the other one is just rounding off. So plan A, I've cut a slot in here with the Dremel, with the cutting disc. I'm going to use big hammer on an impact screwdriver with this bit in the end. Basically you hit it and it'll do a left kind of quarter turn. You hit it really hard, and it may loosen it, we'll see. And then plan B, if that doesn't work, well this is already plan B. Plan C will be to weld something to the end of the nut, the bolt, and try and do something with that. So you can see this, if you imagine you're hitting the end of this, as you hit it, see how it twists just a little bit, goes in and twists to the left, tiny bit. You can do it the other way as well. So you basically pre-tension it with your hand, pushing down as hard as you can, and then you whack the end I hope it breaks free. Well, to my own surprise, this has worked really well. Let's see if I can film it for you. So you put it in the slot, then you twist it anti-clockwise to take up the slack. Alright, and then you whack it really hard. See how it just, see how it's turning just a tiny bit? So I could probably put an old screwdriver in there now and it'll turn just fine. Ah. Speedo drive. Now let's see. Just put that there carefully. I use freezer bags for all these little parts so you can label them and keep them clean. So now, with a bit of luck, this outer tube will slide off, leaving like a thin prop shaft. So let's see. Oh, it's coming. It is moving. There we go. Anyway, that is enough for what I need, because now, they tell you about this. Look at this. They say sometimes the pin partially comes out. It's supposed to be hammered over on both ends, so it can't do that. And eventually it makes a scraping noise on the torque tube as it rubs. So look at that. That's what would have been going on. So, I suppose I'll see if I can tap this out now with a punch. Here you are, look, it actually shows it in this book. Here's a typical issue with torque tube drive shafts. The rivet has started moving out of the hole, like that. Now that's exactly what you can see on mine. So this guy's obviously knows what he's talking about. I just tapped it and it fell out, but look how much fell out. That's it. So basically I assume about 1.5 centimeters of that or so has actually completely worn away by rubbing on the inside of this, because I assume it originally went the whole way through and then was like hammered over on both ends in some way. So yeah, that was a bit rubbish. Obviously needed fixing. So I don't know what I'm looking at here. Ooh, is that meant to be like that? I'm gonna have to read some more books. What's this? Is this some sort of lock washer? I think. Yeah, I'm gonna have to read up what that is. Anyway, this should now slide off there, wouldn't you think? Let's see if that happens. Oh yes, here it goes. Oh, a little bit more, a little bit more. Whee! And we're off. Just try and keep this clean. Right, success. Right, I've slid the inner drive shaft out of the torque tube. So you can see the front end has male splines which would fit. I've got a bag over it to protect it. The female splines and the universal joint here on the back of the gearbox, and the spline pattern is the same, well I hope it is, as this. So that's why with a small spacer here, about this long, you can bolt the gearbox straight up to these splines. Only if you've got a hardtail car, in other words the back axle is welded into the chassis like a hardtail motorbike. But it means your distance, it means you can build a rear engine car basically without it being 20 foot long, because the engine and gearbox can be like right butted up to this with no prop shaft. You can get a conversion kit which converts this to an open drive, which basically means there's like a normal, you end up with a normal universal joint like you'd find on a more modern rear wheel drive front engine car, and then you have a normal open prop shaft. with a universal joint at the front, that would allow the axle to move up and down if you had rear suspension, but you'd end up with a short prop shaft, say a foot long, if you did that as a minimum. And you've got to give it a bit of room to move up and down on the two universal joints, so that lengthens your car slightly. I've seen some people do that, but I'm just going to build it the way, you know, they were kind of built from junkyard parts basically back in the day. And I want my cockpit to be as big as possible, just for personal comfort, so I'm going to get the engine as far back as I can. So the next thing is I'm going to take this rear spring off, but you can't just unbolt these. You have to put a bar between the ends of the spring, which sort of forces the ends outwards. They kind of tuck in under here, so you can undo these bolts. So you can make them or you can buy them, and I'll just see how much they cost. If not, I'll make one. Basically you get a very thick threaded rod running inside a tube with threaded like nut put on the end, and you slowly turn the nut and it threads the bar out. A little bit more on this prop shaft. Apparently later in 1937 and onwards they used a solid rod, whereas this is like a hollow tube. It's just a rod at the end. That rod there fits through these bearings like this. I think that's the other side actually. That's the drive for the speedo takeoff. So I'm going to keep these clean, put them somewhere tidy. And apparently the earlier cars had this tubular shaped, and you can see it looks familiar because hot rodders used to cut them in half and run them down the side of the cars as zoomy exhaust pipes, because they've already got the taper built into them, which makes them look nice. The job today is to remove the rear leaf spring. This axle is upside down at the moment. You can see you've got these spring shackles, and at the moment they're being pulled in because there's no weight on the spring. So what you have to do is use a spring spreading tool. You can get hydraulic ones or ones with a screw thread. So you need to jam something in here under there, and the same the other side, and then jack it out so it just takes the tension off these shackles before you pull the bolts out. Otherwise you end up with something resembling a kind of crossbow or some Roman catapult or something. So you can buy tools to do this, mainly in America, but you can make your own. So what I've got here is length of very thick threaded bar and a piece of tube. So if you push the bar into the tube and then have a thick washer here and then grease it all and then turn the nut, this will slowly get pushed out. So if I make a weld a flat sort of tang there that engages under here and the same the other end, I should have a reasonably good tool just to take the tension off that spring. Right, you can see I've welded these flat plates into the ends, and I've also notched them, you can see there, so it just makes it a little bit less likely for it to slide out that way once it's tight. And it's the same this end. See that little notch put there, that should pretty much stay put. So I'm trying to make this dangerous job reasonably safe. Well, this was my first attempt. I don't know if you can see, but it's a bit of a failure because I was jacking the ends of the spring apart and then the tube just bent. So what I need is to start again with a much thicker piece of tube. Right, so I've got some much thicker tube now. So I've cut a slot with an angle grinder, and then this slab of plate in there. Then I'll tack weld it, then I'll bend it so it's perfect 90 degrees with a set square, and then I'll weld it all up. Okay, I've ground this notch into the end so it doesn't slide sideways off the spring. So the next thing is to just re-grease the threads of this, and then we'll try again. I've already loosened these nuts here and here. You can see whatever bushing was in there is completely gone. The whole thing's like to one side in this loop, so this is all well worn. So yeah, I'm hoping to take tension off the spring and then tap this out with a hammer, but who knows what will happen. I mean, that looks strong enough to me. That looks stronger than the commercially available spreaders available in the US for these things. So who knows? Let's give it a go and see whether we get anywhere. Right, success. So I did this up really tight, and I've got a second nut just to spread the load across more turns of the thread. Managed to get this off. There it is. This won't hammer out, it sees solid, but I managed to hammer this out of this here where it was loose anyway. And it's just come forward and sprung back. The spring has, because it's still attached at the far end. But that means I can now take the tension off the spring, which should make me a little bit less scared that I'm about to die when this thing collapses and fires chunks of metal all across the garage. Well, can anybody spot my deliberate mistake here? So I've detensioned the spring, I've wound this back in all the way I can, but of course the spring is preloaded, so it's still completely jammed up against this, you see, because the spring needs to come in a bit more before this will release and come out. So my special tool is kind of permanently fixed there. I could saw it in half, but again I might end up with a sort of catapult effect. So do you know what, I'm just going to leave it as it is, because I don't actually need this spring at all.